Hi, everyone. Welcome to Office Hours. If you're watching on YouTube, you'll see a little link down below, and you can click on that link and you'll end up in Zoom. If you click on the link there, you'll end up in Mukana, and that's where you become an actual producer for the show. You are driving the conversation that we have here with your questions and with the votes that you give those questions. And so we highly recommend that you join us. If you want to actually answer some of the questions, you just got to join the panel. You need to do that. You need to be here at 6:40 a.m. Pacific Standard Time for the mic checks. You can get here as early as 6. At 6 o'clock, between 6 and 6:40, I can't promise anything. We're just chit-chatting. Usually it's geeky, but sometimes not. And but what we're really here to do is for you to come in and make sure that your kit's working and everything's ready to go to join the panel. So so feel free to interrupt whatever we're talking about and throw those and just ask for help or just for a check. So that's 6 to 6:40. Again, at 7 o'clock. We start the main show, this general discussion for the first hour. Any question that you have around video, media, virtual production is fair game. So definitely ask those questions and tag them as first hour if you can. It makes it easier for us to sort on the back end. The second hour is usually something that we've decided to spend a little bit more time on. So today we're going to explore just tuning versus the well-tempered scale. I don't know what that is. So that's why we put it into the second hour. So I'm planning to learn something from all of you today. So this is so we're gonna have a lot of fun with this. I'm excited to learn what that is. I mean, we've talked about it a little bit, but I don't understand it. So I'm super excited. We have experts here who do understand it, who will illustrate it for us. Tomorrow we're gonna talk about fly kits, the kind of kits. These are mobile kits that we send out to do production. Now that some of us are going back out into the field, what are we taking? How do we pack it, and how do we organize it, and how do we load it in, and how do we load it out? So we're going to talk a little bit about that tomorrow. Thursday is Ruthless Reviews. We've got some high-profile stuff coming up, and we want to make sure that everyone is putting together their best foot forward. And so we're going to this is usually a pretty fun show, a very popular show when we start digging into everybody else. So we're going to be doing that on Thursday. Friday is just general questions about AWS. We had a long string of AWS weeks, and now we're going to kind of come back to it and do Q&A. We'll probably do this at least once a month, just so that people can, as people are working on, I know a lot of people in this group are now working in AWS and trying to figure stuff out, and so this is kind of just an open discussion. Saturday is the Education Hour. A quick announcement, because the Education Hour is starting to get real nuts and bolts about an actual project, we're not going to stream it to YouTube. It's still open to anybody who wants to come in, but that section will not be on YouTube right now, just because it's, we're just going to keep it within people who show up. So anyway, and then, but we will be going to also not stream to YouTube directly, is the behind the scenes for Mad in the Kitchen, which starts at 3 p.m. So you'll get to listen to the crew slowly put together the show. Show starts at 5, and then after the show, between 6 and 6:30, we'll start the post show, where we kind of just talk about what happened and ask questions about why things are the way they are. Why did we cut to this, and why do we use these graphics, and should we really be using audio in our sweepers? These are the deep conversations that we have after the show. So anyway, so it's a really, really great educational opportunity. I highly recommend coming in and watching the behind the scenes of a show actually getting produced. So anyway, that's it. Now we're going to jump into the questions. Guy, what do we got?
First one's coming in from Scott Mueller in Clinton Corners, New York. I can't seem to find a way to save captured stills on my ATEM to my computer. Anyone know if this is possible?
It is possible. Ray thinks it's possible because I can see him nodding. The other thinks it's possible, or he has the same problem. You're much quieter than we expected, Ray.
No? Quite easy. If you open up the ATEM software, I'm opening mine up right now, so I have it in front of me. And if you go to the switcher on the right side, there is a button that says capture still, and if you click on that while smiling into your camera, or at least,
well, I think the issue is he can save that, and the question is how does he get it onto his hard drive? Like, how does he save it out after it's captured it? Yeah. So I believe if you archive, you do a save from your ATEM, it'll save everything, including the images. Go ahead, Aaron.
So I just verified this, but if you just drag the still to your from the still store onto the desktop, it will save it. At least it did a minute ago.
Do that.
Now it's not doing it.
No, I was like, I don't remember ever being able to do that. So yeah, I don't know.
It did it for a second.
Interesting. Yeah. So I think that if you save out, if you do an archive of it, go ahead, Jeff.
Yeah, there's a folder where all your saves go. When you do that save, there's a folder called ATEM Media Pool, and I think it'll store it in there. So that's why I've got a bunch thrown in there.
Yeah. So when you can capture it, you save your project, and then in the inside of that saved project, you'll see ATEM Media Pool, and you'll be able to save it there. You'll be able to pull it out there. I don't think there's any other direct way to do it. Next question.
Another one coming in from Scott Mueller in Clinton Corners. Can someone offer best Zoom video settings for a Beelink by Courtney? I got my good mic by Courtney for Beelink J4125 hardware acceleration for video processing, receiving, sending videos. Also options for video rendering method, post-processing, and capturing method.
Yeah, go ahead, Jeffrey.
So that's a Celeron-based processor with UHD 600 graphics from Intel in that. The best thing to do is to not do anything more than just bring in video. I mean, you can try OBS, but don't overload it with more than one camera type situation. Take as much as you can off of the machine. Just go into the uninstall and uninstall the solitaire, uninstall everything that you can from there. And that will help beef it up. It's more about the CPU than GPU when it comes to Zoom. So you want to save as much CPU cycles as possible.
And the thing to note is that we are going to test these for output. We haven't gotten around to it just yet, but we're going to test the Beelinks for output. For input, remember that without 4 cores, you will not be able to get 1080p. You will be able to get 720, and a lot of people, that's all you have, so it should be just fine for those for Beelinks. But if you're trying to get 1080p out into Zoom from those, you need a much beefier Beelink to do that. Go ahead, Courtney.
It's not as CPU intensive if you have use hardware acceleration for video processing turned on, because then it will use the Intel GPU, because the Windows 10 drivers do support hardware encode and decode of H.264. So then it hands all that off the encoding to the GPU. So it's not quite as intense use of the CPUs on that.
Next question.
Next one's coming in from Chris Royston in Round Rock, Texas. I have been asked to edit a virtual choir with 60 plus videos from students that I need to combine. Is there a tool that helps make this easier, especially the layout? I am using Adobe Premiere, and of course the teacher already has the video files. Am I stuck with manually resizing / repositioning?
Oh no. There's nothing worse than having to edit something where you weren't part of the pre-production. It's up. I'm sorry, but you'll survive it, but it's just much harder. Go ahead, Jeff, and then Sky.
Over a year ago, I did one of these, which I did not was not able to specify how all the videos were shot. So half were in landscape, half were in portrait. And I ended up with a non-grid. I kind of fit people in where they fit, and it was a very manual process. There is a site, virtualchoir.net, if you're willing to pay and take all this workload off yourself. Just hand them all the files.
Nice. One thing that we've done when we get a lot of 9x16 and 16x9 is that we just square them all up. We square the grid up so that just a square one that is 9x9, and so it's just an Instagram style, and then we just build the whole grid that way. That has been one way that we've sorted that out so that we don't have a lot of black space. Go ahead, Sky.
And to that point, you can copy and paste attributes, so you can kind of globally throw an effect onto all of the clips at the same time and then kind of reposition or inside that. Also, subclipping sometimes can help, so you get your square and then you go down inside and move things inside that versus just the clip itself. I
mean, one thing that I'd be tempted to do is treat each clip, and get it to the right square. Like I would square it off. I mean, the way I would approach this is that I would square all of them, get it tracked to wherever it needs to be to fit into that square, and then I would use a replicator in motion. So I would just have them all pop up as a grid, and then you can sit there and you can even animate. Once you do that, you can do a lot of things. You can have them all getting bigger and smaller, and all kinds of other stuff. So
he's on a Premiere platform. Can you How would you take?
I do that in Premiere. All right. So anyway, that's how I would approach it. I wouldn't approach it with Premiere. So the but yeah, in Premiere, I think that I don't think there's any I don't think anything is like a replicator in Premiere. So I think you'd have to put them in by hand. Marty and then Aaron.
My wife does a lot of virtual choirs for churches, and she's using Resolve. You can find a lot of these videos online, and the ones that have just a static grid are the most boring to watch. The real value of these virtual choirs, or what makes them interesting to watch, is the animation, is things moving around. And you don't have to have everybody on screen all the time. Chances are that there are solos, there are mini choirs, there are choruses where people are coming in and out of the song. Have the video reflect that, so you can move people around even as the song is in motion, as you get into the arc of the song. The other thing to note is that not only will you need to be trimming up your videos and timing your videos, but making sure that your audios are all timed up. And that's going to be even a little trickier than video is.
Go ahead, Aaron, real quick.
I was going to say similar thing to Marty, but also check out Eric Whitaker, who does amazing videos with their virtual choir. And then you can also throw it into After Effects and do a similar thing to what you could do in Motion. I don't know how to do it, but
Jeff, real quick.
Along Marty's idea of interesting, check out Bill Davis's edit of the Office Hours Remotes Band Nearsighted Blues, and I will put the link in the
that was great.
Mukana.
That's taking it all the way. So yeah, definitely check that out. Next question.
Next one's from fellow panelists here, Aaron Husledge, Durham, North Carolina. What is a good configuration for Zoom clients in the cloud?
Kai.
Oh, come on, Jonas. You got this.
Go ahead, Jonas.
It really depends on what you want to do. If you need 1080p video, you at least need at least a G40N 2XL. So you get the 1080p boost. Then we are experimenting with having multiple clients or multiple Zoom rooms on a machine. That's also something you want to keep in mind. But then other than that, there isn't really much something you need to do. It's setting up the NDI feeds and the infrastructure then.
And bring more of that up. We'll keep talking about that. Try that, what Jonas just said, and then also come back on Friday. We'll be doing AWS all for a whole second hour. Next question.
Next one's coming in from Brian Carpenter in Cleveland. Following Greg Curda's example and Mickey's previous suggestion to use an Octova M12, I'm now curious how to read mic specs to know if it will take as much gain as an SM7B, or will a Scaralett 2i2 work? How does one read mic/interface specs to match the mic needs?
Go ahead, Carl.
So the interface specs I'll hit first. So generally you'll have on your interface how many dB you can gain. It's usually 60 plus dB on most modern interfaces. For mic, this is kind of what they will look like. So the one you want to look at is probably field sensitivity, the dB one, which is I think 5th one down from the top. So you see it's -28. This is a condenser mic, so it's a bit more sensitive, where with dynamics you're around -60, -50 for that particular, for the Shure microphones, the dynamic ones. That's kind of what you want to look at. So if you've got I've got a microphone that's -70, and if I put that into a 60 dB pre-interface, like one of the cheaper interfaces, it's just going to struggle. And it's one of the reasons why Mickey does -24 LUFS, is because some of our mics will struggle with some of the interfaces we have. So we keep it a little bit lower than, -18 LUFS. But this is a condenser mic, so it's showing -28. So this will easily handle it. But dynamic microphones, especially the Shure ones, yeah, you're looking at around -57 to -65. That number will be. So that's one of the things.
All right, next question. Great answer.
Next one, Brian Carpenter in Cleveland. In order to ensure audio/video sync, can I use the headphone monitor output of the MV7 into my Sony 6100 camera input for Zoom calls? I'm trying to avoid the need to open yet another application on my corporate laptop just to sync AV.
Go ahead, Mickey.
You can, but you have to bear in mind that the headphone output of any device and something like the MV7 would be sending out consumer line level, which is a lot hotter than the microphone level that the camera would be expecting. So you would need to pad that down and properly align or calibrate the output of the MV7 to the microphone. And since that will be an unbalanced connection, make the cable as short as possible. Make sure it's good shielded cable, and don't put it near any high current lines.
Very good. Next question.
Next one's coming in from Todd Worley in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. We have an i7, 16 gigs of RAM for our streaming computer. No other programs are running when we stream. We use LiveStream Studio and Vimeo streaming subscription. Hardwired. No guests using our Wi-Fi. We have 90 megs up, 20 down, or 90 down, 20 up, and often get too slow for quality errors even when streaming at 720p. And then he has a note here that says all programs are closed except LiveStream Studio. No browser open. Windows 10 and Livestream are only programs on the PC. When checking ISP performance on other devices, we are getting our normal upstream speeds, but the streaming PC seems to bottleneck, and we don't know why.
And we're all trying to think through that one. Go ahead, Aaron.
So speed tests are based on a file transfer. They're not based on a stream. So they will peak at the beginning and then drop. And then they'll just tell you what the peak is. And sometimes they average over time, but it's not a very long time. 20 meg up usually means you're going to average about 5 over a long time. So
you should get more
probably,
than that. I mean, 20. I mean, if I said 20,
it depends on
it
depends on the link.
Yeah, it depends on the link. Who your subscriber is. Depends on who your if you're using Spectrum, you're probably right. Anyway, JJ.
So a lot of the tests, usually when you're troubleshooting your network in this kind of situation, it's important to try and get rid of all the network devices from your path, from your edge out. So if you can, connect your device, that device you're using for streaming, at your edge and verify that is indeed your
And by
test.
at your edge, you mean the router the modem that connects to the, or right after that, right? Without anything else in between it.
Whatever you use for routing, your device just next to the carrier. So connect to that device with that one and only one computer, and then run that same test and see if it works there. If it doesn't, then call your carrier immediately.
Yep. Go ahead, Jeffrey.
A little bit on the hardware side, you said you have an i7, but what year is that computer? Is it a laptop? Is it a desktop? That's a big thing. Of course, Sandy Bridge, that's what, 2011 or something like that. So any processor that has Sandy Bridge architecture in it, you should be able to do this. The next thing I would look at is what is your bit rate, even at 720, that you're sending the video to, and what is the frames per second that you're sending the video to Vimeo, and see if you reduce that, if that changes. Lastly, change out that hardwire with a different hardwire to see if that makes a difference.
Good, Tommy. Okay.
Yeah, I don't know if possibly there are other people that are into the Wi-Fi on their personal devices. If you have 100 people or something checking their emails and something, that could throw a wrench into it if it's not managed properly.
Yeah, and Livestream Studio is a bit known for not being super efficient in the code, so you definitely want to look at your CPU loads and just to see where they are in the process, because it's known for a lot of things, and its efficiency of the code is not one of them. So you just want to really open up your data and see what the CPU load. If the CPU load is going over 60%, you may start dropping frames. Next question.
Next one's coming in from Gordon Lake in Los Angeles, California. In an interview setup where 2 mics are going into the MixPre, what is the best cabling solution to send scratch track audio from the MixPre into 2 cameras 10 feet away with 3.5 millimeter stereo input jacks?
Mickey?
Best way? I would.
Yeah, best way. It's a very scary thing to tell us best way. But anyway, go ahead, Mickey.
If it's a MixPre 10, it has balanced output, so you could feed balance out over the 10-foot cable, and then use something like a radial J ISO. And apologies for all the messages. A radial J ISO to turn that balanced connection into an unbalanced one, go into those two cameras. But if you're using something like a MixPre 3 or MixPre 6, wherein it only has a mini jack unbalanced output, I would turn that into balance. Use a transformer balancer, like Radial has a lot of them as well, and do that same chain down the line, sending a balanced connection over the longer cable run.
There you go. And we're assuming that it has a balanced input in the camera, or we're going to go back to unbalanced or stereo.
He mentions that the cameras have 3.5 millimeter stereo
Stereo
input, so
inputs,
I would assume
stereo inputs,
that is unbalanced.
Right. Yep. Next question.
Next one's coming from JJ McKenna in Santa Venetia, California. Happy Towel Day. How often have you seen 42, and that's in quotes, the answer to life, the universe, and everything referenced in your particular specialty?
Pretty much, if you ask me a question and don't follow, if you say I have a question and you don't follow it with a question in about 200 milliseconds, I'll just look at you and go 42. So that's I'm just going to answer your question there. Go ahead, Nigel.
Yeah, so I see it everywhere, but if I can just take a second, I actually knew Douglas Adams a little bit and was on a charity committee with him in 1995, and we were sitting around talking about the future of communication. He said, one day you will join a digital community that will almost be more important than the community you live in. And we looked at him and said, well, you're nuts. No one's ever that's going to happen. And, I look at this screen in front of me and I see how true that is.
Yeah, it's interesting. He had just a little vision, and we had a little bit of elbow grease to make it work. Yeah, absolutely. Thanks. Next question.
Next one's coming in from Eric Butkus in Chicago. Does anyone have any recommendations for hard drive solutions for a small video team, 3 producers that are part of a larger organization? Ideally, would like something that lets us work collaboratively, have redundant backups, is expandable, and would require minimum IT support.
Go ahead, Tyler.
OWC, like pretty much anything from OWC.
Well, so if they're collaborating, we're talking about a NAS. I mean, what are we talking about as far as, they want to all have access to the drive. So I think that, that's the question. I mean, I think a lot of us in our offices, we've used a lot of Synology, NASs that we can access, but I don't know if we'd work off of them. So there gets to be kind of a online versus nearline storage process where we check things out and work on them. We don't usually, once you start going, I want to have everybody work from that drive. If you're a video production, things get complicated really quickly because all the drives need a lot of speed. I mean, you need speed to multiple clients at a very high rate. So that's the thing you have to start thinking about as far as collaboration. If you're just checking files in and out, and then using a faster local system, you're in a different situation. Go ahead, JJ, and then Tyler again.
I think, especially in a Synology environment, it's important to make sure that you're using the right drive type too. So the Western Digital, they come in color types: black, red, blue. So looking at making sure that you're getting the right type for that NAS.
One thing that's been recommended quite a few times on this show is 45 drives, as far as kind of an expandable solution to make that work. Go ahead, Tyler.
I would want to know if they were remote or if they were local. And if they were remote, I would definitely encourage them to start looking into proxy workflows to kind of reduce all of that. So even though it's not part of the question, I would put that on the forefront of my mind.
Next question.
Next one's coming in from Todd Worley in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. Recommendation for a streaming encoder under $1,500. Our PC specs are more than capable, but always slow down. Considering coming out of video software in PC and into an encoder instead of encoding in the PC. Current setup is 1080p cameras coming into a Blackmagic ATEM television studio TV, Magewell going into a PC, and then to Ethernet.
Go ahead, Jason.
It's nearly impossible to beat a web presenter.
Yeah, I mean, I think that a web presenter is great. I mean, for general streaming, I would agree in that price point. Because the web presenter, how much is it? It's like $450 or is it somewhere in that range? It's a pretty good price. I use the links a lot. The Elemental links, they're at $1,000. Now it's going to cost you to go in and out, but man, being able to just completely run them from the cloud, we're sending them out later this week to go to a location. I'm sending 4 of them out On the other side, they don't need to know anything. just plug Ethernet into one jack, plug SDI into the other jack, and then we'll take over, remotely, and we can take it over from a web page, and there's no hard sharing, and it just gets into the cloud, and it's using Zixi to get into the cloud, and then I can redirect it. And I left it on overnight by accident, and I think it cost me like $11. So it's not like it's very expensive to operate. But it's something to think about. I mean, if you think $1,500, that plus the first 2 years of your streaming will probably be that price. Go ahead, Guy.
Yeah, I was going to recommend the same Elemental link. You're lucky I prepped mine to one time show it here on the show and forgot and left it on for a week, and it was a lot more than $11. So the other one I would recommend is there's a new Teradek VDU X that's worth examining. It's got 1080p 60, and then there's also the rock solid AJA Helio, which is another great device that has just been a workhorse for a lot of us. George Kennedy, I know he has multiples of them, and then I haven't got a chance to really push the new web presenter, but I'd imagine that thing's a beast as well.
What I will say is,
I love the display. It looks beautiful.
You say that the interface for the web presenter is the best so far. Like, just you can pop it when you pop it open and you look at it. It's the best one that I've seen so far. It's just really, really well designed. Go ahead, Courtney.
Nobody's mentioned it yet, but besides the web presenter, and I haven't tried it yet, but the Video Assist 12K from Blackmagic also does encode now and has USB out, and it gives you scopes and monitoring and recording. So
right now it won't do it. It does does it stream from there? Like you can plug an Ethernet? No, it
doesn't stream, but it'll encode into a USB.
Right.
It'll be a webcam output, but
I think the question here, I think, is to encode it like a hardware box that we're going to pass in. I will say, I definitely want that monitor. I may have to buy one soon just because it's another really well-designed interface and process. Next question.
Next question, recommendation coming in from Mike Henderson in Colorado. Recommendations for a beginner learner sound mixer for a 3-person podcast that can also be used in a live streaming setting. Flow 8 or MixPre 6. Is it possible to have all podcasters on headphones with the MixPre?
Go ahead, Mickey.
Yeah, I would probably lean more towards the Rodecaster Pro. It's designed specifically for podcasting and is a little more simplified in terms of its feature sets and routing. And it has a built-in 4 headphone outs built in, so you don't need to buy a separate headphone amplifier for everyone to monitor things.
Go ahead, Carl, and then Tyler.
So I can speak to the Flow 8. What I'll do is I'll quickly show. So here's the Flow 8. So you can get up to 4 microphones dynamic up the top. But as Mickey said, you can actually add to this a headphone amplifier. So that's cost you about $20. This is about $250, I believe, US. You can actually have the participants can have different volumes on the headphones, which I think you can also do with a Rodecaster as well.
The tricky part is when your participants say they want to do mix minus, then you need a bunch of outputs. Go ahead, Tyler.
Yeah, I would say for learning, gain staging, like learn everything about gain staging, because that'll be kind of your fundamentals and will make a huge difference. And then I would research auto mixing. Like, it depends. Is this guy doing it live? Is he doing it in post? If he's doing it live, I would get some sort of mixer that allows you to do auto mixing. In Reaper, there's a free script for auto mixing. If you're using Logic, there's WT Auto Mixer, which is $150. But having an auto mixer for a podcast will make a massive difference for your quality.
And my almost all my history with podcasts have been to automate it. To basically to go through and just I actually pay someone to do that for the podcasts we've had in the past, where we just here's a podcast and they just literally go through and cut everything out when someone's not speaking. The auto mix, you're absolutely right. Being able to throw the filter on and just have it done. But as with many things, nothing's as good as a person that can do it. It depends on how far. If you're getting started and you don't have the time, then don't do that. But even my sister, who doesn't make any money on her podcast, I think just wants it to sound good, and she sends it out and has it done because it's just it's easier. It's not very expensive to do because it won't take someone who's good at it very long to do your podcast, unless it's a really long podcast. Hosmuk and then Greg.
Yeah, I was just wondering about all three podcasters being on headphones. Is that possible with a podcaster?
You would.
Yeah.
Yeah, go
The
ahead.
the Rodecaster Pro has 4 headphone outs, so everyone can be on cans.
And does the Rodecaster do a mix minus on those cans, or is it just the same output?
No, as far as I know, it doesn't do a mix minus with the local sources. But if you bring in a source via USB or via Bluetooth, like from a phone,
And how many
like
inputs does it have?
A call in. I think it has 4 preamps,
Right.
if I remember correctly.
Right. Go ahead, Greg.
I just want to echo your sentiments about the cut and fill technique. It's really, really, really a great thing that everybody should, every person who's interested in sound should know how to do, because it is the ultimate auto mixer. And once you do it, it's just fantastic. It's a Zen kind of a thing once you get into it, though, too. So
I used to edit a lot of the twits. When Twit first moved to video, there was no real capacity at Twit to do that. So I'd have to do I do the video, and then I do all the audio, and it is very much like knitting. You just sit there, and I have a tendency to I take out all the breaths.
My students are always looking for the auto mixer, and they want to use this and this and that, and I say no, you're going to cut it.
Again, for a while I thought that it was breaths drive me crazy, and I thought that it was, oh no, you never hear breaths anywhere, except I just ruined it for all of you. If you listen to NPR, you can hear these huge, and you can tell how they feel about what they're talking about by how they're breathing in, on it as they prep the show.
Especially on the interviews.
Yeah,
That's
exactly.
the dead giveaway.
Yeah. There's a Renee Montagne especially. You can tell exactly what she thinks by how she breathes in, when she's talking on the mic. And those Neumanns pick up everything. Anyway, next question.
Next one's coming in from Chuck Wojak in Concord. Choices for a one-time audio-only stream for a city 4th of July event. Any recommendations and use cases? Low latency, maybe doing RF and internet. Want to keep them close in latency.
I don't know. I think the thing you have to think about is how to get your audio source really close to the sound in the 4th of July. I think about a balloon, see how long it lasts. Sorry, I'm just floating through. Yeah, go ahead, Tim.
I guess my question for Chuck would be, what's the nature of the program material? I do a number of things that involve fireworks and airplanes and stuff like that on holidays. And we had to settle on a particular RF distribution system because we could not make everything play well together on a consistent basis in time when using an IP audio distribution system. So, what we wound up doing actually was using RF from Listen Technologies or Williams Sound. These are people that make assisted listening systems. The good news is it's a protected frequency, and we are providing that for people who think they need their hearing aids to hear fireworks and the music that goes with them. But we did that because we could get away with it, and we just do a couple of hops with it and repeat the signal for the things that we can't do on hardwire.
Go ahead, Jeffrey.
One thing to keep in mind, even if you are doing low latency, is copyright. And if you don't have the right copyright or right licensing to do that type of thing, you could get in trouble after the fact.
My comment on that real quick is that the copyright clearance is not my problem as as the system provider.
Yeah, exactly.
That's the producer's issue. And if it's on city property, it's for the city to get the proper licensing.
Yeah, exactly. Jonas.
You could use Nimble server and then stream it to there, and then have an audio player like Office Hours does. That could work and should be pretty low latency if you tune it.
The difference between RF or FM, which by the way you could use as well. Low to medium powered FM will go a fair distance with the right antenna, and so it depends on who you're serving. If it's a live stream that you're serving people that are not there, I think it would be really interesting to have a live stream that you could watch that kind of gives people context or talks about it, or it's something for people to listen to while they're at a fair or at something. I think that there's something interesting there. I love the question. I haven't thought about doing that kind of live stream, but San Rafael, for instance, always has its big fair, right during that, and they do fireworks at the end. But be very curious to have like a booth there that was doing interviews and talking about things and talking about some of it historical and some of it, you know, what it means for people, and so it gives people something to listen to while they're walking around. Go ahead, JJ.
Yeah, something Centerfeld did recently with the San Francisco Opera Company was we had the opera here in town, right behind the Memorial Center, outdoors, and people drove up in their cars and they turned on the radio and you could listen to the opera going on from your car. So it was a drive-in opera presentation. It was really great.
I've seen one where they did not an opera, but they did a live orchestra to fireworks. It was impressive. Like this, like I was like, every city should do that. Anyway, next question. Opera would be good too. Next question.
Next one's coming in from Jason Sipe in Murrieta, California. What are the panelists' thoughts about the tech used for Eurovision this year? And he's got a link to Twitter. Here's a thread with more info. Looks like Jeffrey Powers pulled it up. And it looks like he's got to run. It says time to teach. I'll check your replies later today. Thanks, everyone.
The one that's the most interesting part of the process generally is CuePilot, which I find to be fascinating. CuePilot is something that I didn't even know existed until I was at IBC, and they showed Eurovision, you know, and they showed it. But basically, they set up all the edits for all those cameras in a, you know, pre-built system, CuePilot, and so they rehearse and rehearse, and the cameras just know where they need to be at a certain time. But there's no one cutting the show. I mean, during the performances, there's definitely someone cutting the show between them. But when they hit the performance, they know exactly where all the cameras are going to be and exactly how they're going to do it. And it's just boom, 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 boom. And it's an incredible thing to watch go. Go ahead, Jonas.
What I found very cool is the AR and XR stuff they did. There was stuff they produced for 18 months and now finally showed. And for the cameras, they have a track system with a automatic dolly, so they can move around automatic and then push to the height automatic, which is quite cool. And yeah, the Twitter thread is amazing. There's a lot of insight and what lighting consoles are used and all that. It's a really cool event from a tech perspective.
Yeah, I've been in a lot of conversations about kind of this kind of highly automated concert experience, and it's kind of cool. What a lot of us have leaned to is not having any less camera operators, but just augmenting them with cameras that are doing their own thing, that do things that a camera operator could never do, you know. And so, like, if you look at Motorized Precision is a company that makes these arms, and they run on rails, and you can build very, very complex moves, you know, on a Motorized Precision arm where it's just doing these big things. And if you know exactly what happens is if you tie, which they have in Eurovision. This isn't, I don't like Eurovision's necessarily using these, but what we've been looking at is if the band is playing to a click track and you know that they're going to hit things at a certain point, and then they rehearse, and we know that they're going to be on their, you know, they're good enough to be on their mark when they do those things, you get this incredible, you can really get an incredible experience. And then what it does is it frees up our camera operators to do the manual pickup stuff that is close up and the artistic. And so you don't have any camera operators doing kind of the boring things. You don't have any, you know, they're not just doing basic wides and everything else. The machines do that. And then you let the great camera operators do some of the jib shots and a lot of handheld. You know, that's the big thing, is we just have more handheld, because that gives it a real organic feel. And when you mix the two of them together, we find them to be really, really compelling. Go ahead, Jonas.
And that's part of what they did. They had the automated stuff, then the crane was manually, and then 2 Steadicam operators, which produced with, I think, 20 cameras in total, produced a nice feed.
It's cool. Next question.
Next one's coming in from TJ Asher in Minneapolis. Back to the Family Photo Archive project. What are people doing to annotate or note who is who in any given photo? A digital photo, not paper print. I have hundreds of family photos with people in them and have no idea who they are.
Yeah. That is the tricky part. Go ahead, Carl.
So I find that I actually imported my JPEGs, not the RAWs, but JPEGs into Photos for Apple. Their Faces ID is pretty good. It stays on my computer, so I'm not sharing it out, so if you're privacy concerned. And if you just let it chug away for about 3 days, it'll pick every face. It's getting much better after 10 years. It's getting really good at actually noticing faces from the side and in dark lighting.
If you start going through and IDing them, what I find incredible is that it'll pick them. It can pick up, like, my daughter from very different ages, and it has built that system That should terrify all of us how good it is to extrapolating who that person is contextually. But it's super effective at figuring out. You do have to know who they are. Like, I mean, you have to know who the people are originally. So you get a photo of them or a couple photos, and it'll keep on asking you, and you go, is this that person? Is this that person? Is this that person? And once you've identified enough of them, it's able to identify it pretty effectively. Next question.
Next one's coming in from John Foltz in Sellens Grove, Pennsylvania. Meter markings for audio channels sometimes differ from hardware and software. How do you know where to start setting levels to get parity?
Greg, Mickey, go ahead, Mickey.
Yeah, that's why it's really handy to have an infinitely variable tone generator, a tone generator that you can adjust the level that it feeds tone out. So like say, for example, like a completely digital audio chain, where you typically the reference level would be -20 dBFS. You can line everything up that's -20, but once you hit something that's like say has a marking at -18 dBFS, you can bring the first stage up to -18. Everything should line up, and then you can then look at that piece of equipment to my -18 line or tick mark there, and calibrate that, and then move down the chain after that.
Good, Carl.
So as soon as I heard hardware and software, you kind of get across to this. So a lot of hardware will have an analog meter in it before it turns into digital. That hardware may turn it into digital, but it's going to have an analog meter in it, and that's going to tell you where you're clipping. So 0 in the analog world is equal to, as Mickey said, it can be set to -18. You can actually set it with some different software where you want it. But -18 is generally the rule for where most people will set it. So 0 in the analog world will equal, it depends, because you can actually set it. So you can set it anywhere from -15 to -24 in your software, -26. But -18 is kind of, it's Pro Tools. The reason why -18 is because Pro Tools call -18 0. So Pro Tools are the king when it comes to this kind of stuff back in the early 2000s. So that's where everyone else followed with plugins. So plugins generally go to -18 because what they're sitting within will usually be -18 as well. But that's kind of the conversion. So -18 in digital equals 0 on your meters on hardware if it's an analog, let's say analog interface.
Go ahead, Marty.
You're muted, Marty.
Oh.
Sorry about that. There are different kinds of meters that measure audio in different ways. There are peak meters, which are kind of very instantaneous, like just at this very moment in time. And then there's average meters, which measure the audio signal over a period of time of, say, half a second to a full second. And how they average them out is a matter of mathematics. And the same audio signal can look different on different meters. There are many standards, not just one. So it's really helpful to know, if you're an audio engineer, what you're looking at and what a meter is showing you. There's a wealth of information on the web, but you can also look at standard organizations like the Audio Engineering Society and SMPTE, and there you can find information about what these meters are, how meters derive the visual of the audio signal, so that you can understand what you're looking at, because you will run into different software, different hardware, all using different kinds of meters to represent the audio. So you really kind of need to understand what you're looking at. It's not an easy thing to do.
Absolutely. Greg?
And another big issue is in hardware, a lot of manufacturers, specifically camera manufacturers, don't put any kind of detent or any kind of hash mark where they think the optimal audio, where you should line up to 0. It's just a straight bunch of bars, and you're always in this quandary of what should I do. My general go-to is that if your peaks are hitting somewhere between half and two-thirds, you're probably okay. Now, we've also have manufacturers who decide to change meter types without any documentation. And I remember this happened on some beta machines. This is years ago, but it caused an awful lot of confusion and a lot of distortion because they changed meter types. They changed from a VU to a PPM, and you're lining it up the same way as you normally would, and suddenly you're 8 dB too hot.
There's a lot of scales, and the scales on, like, for instance, the audio monitor on Blackmagic is so off that we just tell people to ignore them. Like, just it tells you that there's a signal there, but don't pay attention to anything that comes out of that piece of hardware. Like we just kind of ignore it as it just tells us that there's life in the SDI signal. Go ahead, Tyler, and then Jeff.
I was gonna just recommend checking out. I mean, it's a conversation we've had before, but it's researching DBFS, RMS, and Robert Scoville has an awesome video on gain staging, which he thinks why -18 RMS is important to him, and yeah, those are all really important things to check out.
Jeff,
to pick up what Marty said, it was great to learn about the difference between peak and averaging meters. While you're doing that, listen to speech, listen to music, program, and watch the meters. I bet most of the audio engineers that are here don't need to look at whether a meter is peak or average, because instinctually you know the way that meter is moving because you've been working with them for so long. You instantly know what kind of meter that is. You look at a new meter and you hear it with the program, you can figure out what it is, and you know if it's off. Like Greg was talking about the beta, you know that meter is wrong. That only comes after years and years of looking at different kinds of meters and listening to program while it's going.
Right. Mickey?
Yeah, just one last quick thing. Like, as we start to get used to working with audio and also metering, start to make a correlation between the actual sound of what you're mixing to the meter, so that as you move along, you can rely on just your ears and you don't have to look at the meters as you actually do your mix. Train your ears to know what the meters would be reading at a specific sound level.
Greg, and then Marty, but real quick.
Okay, but just was following up on Jeff's thing. What I was really talking about was the fact that in production, a lot of times you will run tone out of your mixer and you'll line up the camera to that point. And then once you do that, you're gone. So you're never looking at the meters, in actual production.
Yeah. Marty?
So in respect to something that Mickey said earlier, to line up your meters with a static sine wave tone, that is a static signal is something that we never see in real audio, but it's a useful way to see where your meters are going to be. However, most meters today are peak reading meters, and the static tone is not going to be representative. So another kind of signal source to use would be a click track, which has a lot of peak transient information in it. So run a click track through it and then see how your meters, all your different meters compare.
Next question.
Actually, on that one too, I was just jumping into the MixPre because there is tone continuous now, and then there's tone. I don't want to press it because oh wait, will it go off? Never mind. I don't want to push it, but there is one that
don't do it.
What's it called? Don't do it. Let's do it. Tone mode. Oh, it's called ident. So if I click that,
so
I don't want to blow your ears.
Left-right identification.
Just let you identify which channel it's coming.
Wasn't there a beep or something? Tone. Mickey,
pulse?
what is it? That it's a pulsing one or something on what?
Yeah,
I believe it's on
that
this.
would be left ident, where and on the right channel it sends a constant 1K tone, and on the right and the left channel it sends a 1K tone but pulses it.
Can I send it? Come on, let me send it. Let me send it.
No, we all have headphones in.
Okay. All right. Here it goes. The seventh scroll in Brooklyn, New York asks, morning guys, we're considering purchasing a Heil PR40 for our setup to use with our Rodecaster Pro. Good idea or not? And he's got a note. We know gain could be an issue, so would it make sense to get a MixPre 3 first?
I think it depends on how many inputs that you need, to make that work. I mean, I do think that the preamps on the MixPre are better than the Rode. So you're going to get a cleaner signal out of it. I have to admit that recording podcasts on sound devices hardware for 15 years. so I, like that's kind of all I've used for a long time. I will admit that I'm a little stuck on the preamps. So, for those records, but I think that, I think the Heil PR40 is going to sound fine. I don't think you're going to have a problem with the Rode. Does anyone use the PR40? Is it too quiet for the Rode, or is the Rode preamps good enough to pull them up? Go ahead, Mickey.
Yeah, I've seen a lot of people use the Rodecaster Pro with SM7Bs. So I would assume that it would be able to pull up enough clean gain for something like a PR40.
Yeah. So probably either one would work. I mean, I like the MixPre 3s and the 6s and so on and so forth because of they're more compact. So that for your podcast, you need one thing, but for cameras or something else, then in the field you might need another form factor. So being able to do all of those things is useful, but it's more convenient if all you're going to do as a podcast. I would probably lean towards the Rode. Next question.
Next one's coming in from Scott Mueller in Clinton Corners, New York. Is there an easily accessible alternate chat for presenters in a presenter meeting to interact with participants in a show meeting, or is the best solution having presenters on a second device in the show meeting?
Just trying to figure that. I'm trying to unwrap that question. Oh, well, so if what you're talking about is having the presenters use the chat to talk to each other inside of Zoom, we never do that. And we might, you don't need another device, but you need another platform. The reason we never, ever, ever do that in Zoom is because every time we've allowed presenters to talk to each other, even though there's a privacy setting where you can send only to other presenters, they invariably get it wrong. They respond to a public one, and then they start chatting again, and now they're in public, or half of it's in public or something, and it's a real mess. So we try not to have our presenters ever use the same chat platform to go back and forth with each other as they do with the audience. It can sour the show really fast. So next question.
Next one's coming in from Jonas Dottel in Reutlingen, Germany. New GH5 Mark II with wireless live streaming was just released. I think that was streaming just during the show here. Also, GH6 with 4K 120 was announced to be still in development and will be released later this year. Useful, or is MFT already dead?
I mean, I think that MFT is probably not dead because people own a lot of glass that does it. I think that, they look like great cameras. And I think being able to stream those is interesting. I want to keep on underlying the 120 frame per second. You may notice that it's showing up everywhere. So just keep watching that story. That 120 frame per second keeps on showing up on every camera. All the new cameras are starting to support that. We should all be paying attention to that. They're not doing that for slow motion. Go ahead, Tyler.
A lot of the cameras that I've looked at will advertise that they say 120 frames a second, but a lot of times it's just they're taking 120 and then moving it down to 24. Is there a way to know specifically if I'm actually getting a deliverable of 120 frames a second from some website providing that data?
Well, it's 120 frames. It's shot at 120 frames a second, and then it delivers it back to 24. A lot of times what you have to do is then go back and speed it back up again. I mean, what they're delivering out oftentimes is at a frame rate that they think that you want. So the project might be 60 frames a second or 30 frames a second or 24. It's going to deliver those frames back in whole increments. And again, one of the things that makes it easy is that 120 frames a second is evenly divisible by 24, 30, and 60. So if your projects are that way, it's really easy for them to just go down to those. There's never a mismatch in how they're setting those up. So 120 is this kind of nice number in that area. And again, there's a lot of R&D going around with live events and sports and so on and so forth of what does 120 look like played back at 120. There aren't a lot of platforms that do it just yet, but you just want to keep watching that. Almost every camera is coming up with is delivering at 120. We've been seeing it internally. We've been seeing it for the last 4 or 5 years. of R&D, in 120 frames per second. And it's when done well, like anything else, it's unlike anything else that you've ever seen. Like, it's just an entirely different world. And it will change the way we make content, because you can't, when it goes into full aperture, I mean, I've said this a couple times, but when it goes into full aperture, your brain really has a hard time separating it from reality, and it creates an entirely different experience. We were talking about, I hadn't thought about until this week, or I don't know, some conversation came up that, wow, horror films would be really bad, or really good, depending on how you look at them at 120 frames a second, because it would be very scary. Next question.
Next one's coming in from Dave Kaufman in Vancouver, BC. And he asks, can the panel explain what we are seeing in the meeting meters window? And I believe he means the WLM meters window, which if Mickey wants to explain that one.
Let's do it fairly quickly because we're running out of time. Go ahead, Mickey.
Yeah. So what comes out here, the meters is just a reading of our loudness level. This loudness is a different reading from RMS or VU or peak. It is weighted differently and isn't a flat reading of the frequency response. It gives emphasis on certain frequencies that humans are more sensitive to.
Next question.
Next one's coming in from Douglas Carmichael, and CuePilot's marketing mentions you are always in control. Use CuePilot to cut on ME1 and take over on program should the unexpected happen. What does ME1 mean? Is it similar to a bus or matrix on an audio console?
It is. It is a bus. I mean, it's MixFX, MixFX1, and depending on so if you're using an ATEM, it's MixFX1, and MixFX1 is generally your program bus. But in many other switchers, you have a program bus, and then you have ME1, ME2, ME3, ME4. All these other ones that are fed into it. So by having CuePilot running an ME, it's constantly editing based on a time track. But you can always cut away. What they're basically saying is just make that one of your inputs. You cut to that and let it run. If anything ever happens, you just cut away, to something, and you can have all your cameras going into both buses, so that you could just start cutting the show again if CuePilot came off the rails. So that's what they're telling you, and we do that a lot. If you look at the way right now Mad in the Kitchen is set up, Matt, I believe Nate still has it set up where we have it on, the different super sources, for instance, are on different MEs, just so you can cut to them and you don't have to rebuild them. The other thing that you can do is set up MEs that feed the super sources. And so what's nice about that is, if you think about it, you have the windows for a super source, but you can cut in what's going into those windows. A lot of times you'll see that with a live event where you'll see that, they're covering something live and that is getting cut. But there's a little person, a little picture of a person on the other side. That part is just maybe a video, and they're in another ME cutting what's going on in the main screen. So those MEs let you kind of stack shows inside of each other. Next question.
Next one's coming in from Aaron Husledge in Durham, North Carolina. Has anyone played with GatherTown? And there's a link, and I believe Jeffrey Powers has got a nice screen share.
Yeah, I think that a couple of people here, Leo has used GatherTown, for a couple different events. So when you see Leo Mendel here, he's the one that's probably has the most experience of all of us. Go ahead, Jeffrey.
So yeah, I've tried it very, very sparsely. It reminds me of the days when I was in high school and I was playing Ultima and playing, on the Nintendo, playing some of these first-person games or third-person games, excuse me. So you get that nostalgic feel to it. But other than that, it's not too bad when you bring in people and trying to connect to people. But it's not a business type system.
Sorry, so far I think all the virtual platforms, the highest ranking that they get is not too bad. so that's they're not horrible. It doesn't make me want to leave immediately.
I've seen worse. Yeah,
I've seen worse. Yeah, there we go. That's the high scale of most of these so far. Yeah. All right. Next question.
Scott Mueller wraps up this first hour with, how does one go about creating a system like you are using on Mukana? What's the cost/link to sign up?
creating Mukana is expensive. so I wouldn't try to, you could definitely try it if you raise money. You could probably try to create a new one. But it's a lot of development that went into where it's at right now. We make it available to folks that you can reach me on Discord and talk about it, but it's a one-time setup fee for each event right now. We're hoping to make that more accessible to folks over this year. So, but we do make it available, but you have to kind of talk to us. And again, there's custom coding. You do get to color it and put new, reorganize things if you need to. So there's some customization that's available for it. And it does a lot of other things than what we do here. So it has, a lot of other feature sets that are used in other versions of it for events. But we use it probably every couple of weeks for a different external event, but usually it's packaged with our streaming services, but we also make it available on its own. All right. Now we're going to talk about all this thing, temper. I don't understand it, which is why I wanted to put it in. Someone said, okay, we're going to talk about this. I was like, I do want to talk about this because I don't understand all of this. So I'm just going to throw the ball to Jeff, whether he's ready for it or not, to kick off the conversation of explaining these scales.
I think before we do that, we should talk about the overtone series.
Okay.
And how our hearing works. So frequency and pitch are really related. Frequency is measurable, objective, pitch is subjective, but they track really well. And it's all in ratios. So an octave, which is the first two notes of Somewhere Over the Rainbow, that leap going from one note of a particular name to another note. So, or if you know do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do, going from the low do to the high do is an octave, and that is a frequency ratio of a doubling. So a doubling or a half is an octave. And anytime you have a frequency, you have something that is periodic, so it repeats. And if we go back to Fourier, who was a French mathematician, he figured out that anything that's periodic is made up of very specific frequencies, no matter how complex it is, and those frequencies are integer multiples of the fundamental. So 1 times the fundamental, 2 times the fundamental, 3 times the fundamental, 4 times the fundamental. So is that legible?
Yeah, it's great.
Okay, so I picked an easy number of 250 hertz. That's pretty close to middle C. And so if we take those and we just multiply them, and this goes on to infinity, but well beyond what we can hear, but where I've only got the first 8 here. So you just have, if you have something that is playing middle C or close to it, playing 250 hertz, you can do that on a voice, you can do that in piano, you can do that in an oboe, you can do that on a violin. But all of those sound different because they have different combinations of these overtones. So you see there, if it's repeating 250 times a second, it contains 250 hertz and 500 hertz and 750 hertz, but it can't contain 333 hertz. These are the only ones that can exist. So if that first one is middle C, double that 500 is an octave above that. And then if you go to the fourth one, 1000, that's another octave above that. And if you go all the way up to the 8th one, that's another octave above that. So all those are C. And then we get these other ratios. So the first one we see is the third harmonic, which is 750, 3 times 250. And often you'll see this as a 3-2 ratio because we can take that 750 and divide it by 2 and bring that G note, which is a fifth above it. And why is it called a fifth above it? Because we count up C, D, E, F, G, right through the notes of the scale. That's 5 notes up from C. And so that G can exist there as G5, or we could take it down to G4. So that's why you see these ratios 3-2. And so what you get is when you play a simple one note on an instrument, so you play a C on a violin, it has C in it, and it has octaves of C in it, but it also has other notes in it, and those are the overtones. So it has a G in it, it has an E in it, and so C, E, G is a C major chord. The problem is, or the harmonics have these nice relationships that are integer multiples. And that's where we get the well-tempered tuning, because if you try to play a C major chord with a group of musicians, the person playing the low C has a harmonic E in their note. So the person who's playing the E would tune to that, and choirs do this, and brass groups do this, and string quartets do this. But the problem is that if we split this up evenly, the way we do an even tempered scale, well, how do you break up a doubling into 12 parts? And that's where you get half steps. So we split up, and I know it's confusing because you think octave, you think octopus, you think 8, because there's 8 notes between do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti to the next do. But there's all the half steps in between there. So there's C and C sharp, and there's D and D sharp, and E and F sharp. So there's actually 12 notes, which we break up into 12 parts. So there's 12 half steps. And how do you get from 250 to 500 in 12 steps that are multipliers? That's 12th root of 2. So you have this weird multiplier. So I did that there, and these are what the actual... so if you look in the third column where it says frequency, that would be the well-tempered sort of one that sounds the most harmonic. And the one on the right is how we do modern Western music, where we spread out the differences. And if you look, the numbers in the third column and the last column don't line up for the particular note. And that's why we have these problems with tuning systems. I'm going to take a break off of that for a second for any questions. I saw Tyler playing with Logic earlier. Tyler, do you have that open, or you want me to open that up? Because we can actually hear some of these.
Yeah, go ahead.
Ray's going crazy.
Enable screen sharing?
Go ahead, Ray.
Jeff, bless your heart. I really appreciate where you're going with all this, but I'd like to start at a much higher level and try and reach where people live, start where they are, rather than the deep musical theory. I know all that you're teaching, but first of all, I want to tell all of you and everyone listening to this, you have all heard performances done in just tuning. Does anyone know what performances you have heard that are always done in just tuning? Carl?
So Reveille. So done on a bugle.
Okay. But every barbershop quartet that you've ever heard sings in just tuning. Every non-fretted, small stringed group can play in just tuning. All it is it means when you sing harmony, when you sing 2 notes, they are related by integer arithmetic perfectly. And when you hear really tight harmony in a barbershop quartet or any acapella group, you know what the word acapella means? It's an Italian word meaning we can't find an accompanist. Anyway.
I thought it was a cappella, which meant singing without hats.
Right. There you go. Anyway, the point that I'm trying to get at is when you voices and non-fretted or keyboarded instruments can play in perfect integer math and get perfect tight harmony. When you hear tight harmony, you know it. It's just beautiful.
What
All
makes
right?
it type harmony? Just as I know there's a little bit.
Because
what's
the notes.
The scientific? Yeah.
Okay. The scientific is the basic harmony is playing 2 notes that are integer related, a third, a fifth, a fourth, etc. So they are exactly harmonically related. Now you say, well, why on a piano can't we do that? Can't we play 2 notes and won't they be harmonically related? No. The reason why is when you go from one key to another, when you shift keys, when you go from playing in the key of C to playing in the key of B flat, which is a different You set all the notes up or down a certain pitch. That's called transposing. When you do that, the notes that are required to be played to be perfectly integer related are not the same. For instance, the B flat on a piano, if you're playing in the key of C, well, there's no B flat in C, but at any rate, when you're playing a certain note on the piano in a certain key, a certain chord, and you change to a different key, the pitch of a specific note on the piano needs to shift very slightly to stay an integer multiple. And if it doesn't, it's slightly out of tune. So what they did is they came up with a tuning scale that's a compromise. The piano is not perfectly tuned. In fact, here's a little known fact. You can be tone deaf and tune a piano. Okay? The way you do it is you play one of these, you play a third on the piano, and you tune it until you can hear a beat. If the frequencies are not exactly integer related, you'll hear this wah, 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 wah beat. You tune it until there's no beat, and then there's a chart that tells you whether to tune it up or down, sharp or flat, until you get a certain number of beats per minute. And you can tune a piano precisely by using that technique. And a person can be tone deaf and do that.
Yeah, go ahead, Brian.
I set up a demo so we could hear this. And actually, first thing to Jeff's harmonic series, it might be helpful to hear that. So let me play the harmonic series.
By the way, I think it started making sense because of Jeff's graph. Like Jeff's graph of showing that when I saw the math, when I started seeing the numbers, that was the best for me. It was the best way to start because I tend to be math oriented. So I saw the numbers and the numbers all started. I was like, oh, now I understand what's going on here. So and I'm amazed that we don't have math class just and music class be merged together. I think it would make a lot more sense for all of us. Anyway, go ahead, Brian.
So it's the best way to learn trigonometry.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
So what Jeff has on the screen there, I'm going to play for you so we should be able to all hear this. You're hearing piano there, I hope?
Yep.
So I'm going to go up, and I'm actually going to go beyond what Jeff is showing, the first 8, because that's where the fun really starts. But here's what Jeff is showing. Actually, go down the octave.
I've got 16 on the next slide.
Oh, do you? Okay. And there's 9. And it keeps going. And as you see, they're all getting closer and closer together. And the further up you go, the more dense that becomes, notes that in Western music we would never use. And then the other thing I wanted to do was to show you, let us hear what the difference is between an equal tempered chord progression, simple chord progression, and then one played with just intonation. So same piano, and I'm just going to do a simple 1-4-5. So C major chord, F major chord, G major chord. Whoop. I'm not very well. Sounds fine. We're used to that sound. Now, if I turn on, I've set up my one synthesizer to do just tuning. It's the same piano sound. I'm going to play the same thing. It's not going to sound that much different for you. There's subtle differences. Musicians will hear the difference. Some of the rest of us might not.
And what is the difference that they'll hear?
The chord sounds a little richer, a little.
It rings a little bit. It has like a little breathing to it that you didn't have before.
Well, and that's a bit of what Ray was referring to, where if you sing it in tune. Now, I'm going to do the same thing with an F sharp major progression. And this is with equal temperament. All right. And here we go with just tuning. I mean, it sounds horrible. It sounds like a piano that hasn't been tuned for a very long time. And the reason I picked F sharp as the key to do that is that uses more notes in a C major scale that are further up and in that not quite accurate kind of tuning. So if this was F sharp as the fundamental, that would sound great, but then the C would sound bad. So we use equal temperament to make it, for an instrument like a piano or a fretted instrument like a guitar, to be able to play in any key.
Good. Greg?
Yeah, usually it's the tritones, it's the augmented fourths and diminished fifths that sound the worst, but there also is a subtle difference mostly in the thirds. And this is where each different key gets its own feel. And you know, the old composers knew all this. And if you play something that was written in G minor, for instance, and you try to transpose it up to C minor, it's not going to be the same piece. It's not going to have the same effect. It's completely different. And the thing with it is, and to what Ray was saying, it's built on the idea of a string. It's built on the Pythagorean theory, basically. Okay, although there are Pythagorean tuning and just tuning are not exactly the same thing, but for this purpose they're pretty close. So you have a string that's freely vibrating from point to point. That's the fundamental. Okay, number 2 on Jeff's scale was the first octave. So if you cut that string directly in half, so now you have half the wavelength, you're at an octave. If you cut that string in 3, so it's 3 vibrating parts, that's a fifth. If you cut it in 4 parts, that's your next octave. And so on and so on and so on. So it's all based on the vibrating string. And actually the real precise way to tune a guitar is to tune it with the harmonics, not by placing your finger on a fret and going and listening to the next note. You're playing the harmonics against each other and adjusting it to get rid of the beats. And that's what just tuning is called beatless. Okay, because there isn't any. But the thing, and what makes it all different is as you build up the fifths, if you're tuning a fifth to a fifth to a fifth to a fifth, and you keep going up the scale, your notes are going to be different. And an A flat is not the same as a G sharp. Only in equal tempered tuning is that true. And in equal tempered tuning, they standardize the distance between each half step. Okay, and so in some way it removes some of the color, but it was awfully easy to move the piece around to a different key and sound reasonably the same.
And when you move something to a different key, what do? Like, what's the math of changing from one key to another?
If I have a piece in C, and or let's make it different. Let's make it if I have a piece in C, but for instance, I've got an all horn band. They want to play it in B. They want to see it in B flat.
Now, why do they want to see it in B flat?
Because that's how their horns are tuned. That's how that's the resonance. I don't know exactly. Is that right? The resonant.
Brian can probably tell us what.
Yeah, well, let's just say their horns are tuned to B flat.
Yep.
And he can expound later. But anyway, so what you would do is you would lower each note 2 half steps. So you go C, B, B flat. You take the next note in the scale, you move everything down 2 half steps.
2 half steps.
And the relationship between everything stays the same.
Right.
If you did that in just tuning, it wouldn't be the same. Okay, right. but harmonically, it's much more accurate. Equal tempered tuning is not harmonically accurate, and I think that's what Ray was getting at.
Right. Go ahead, Carl.
So I kind of want to bring in like a real world, is exactly what Greg was saying, to a tuning to something that has a fundamental. That's what you're trying to say, that an instrument has a fundamental frequency, brass. So what I'll do is I'll bring up a real world example. So simple trumpet, this is a C trumpet. So its resonant frequency is C. If you just blow through it at its lowest
When you say it's resonant, when you just blow through it, it's resonant frequency.
The lowest note it will make when you're pressing down none of the buttons will be a C. That's its fundamental. We'll call it resonant because that's actually the air inside the trumpet. It resonates at C. It'll be middle C. So what we've actually been looking at is really good because it's actually given us a background to the next picture I'm going to show. So these are harmonic series depending on what you're actually pressing on the trumpet. So the buttons on the closest one to your mouthpiece will be 1, 2, and 3. So the first one here is the open, and that's actually the harmonic series for the open. And I'll actually zoom in on this because the 7th note's got a bracket around it. And we heard this 7th note before in demonstration that Brian gave. So that 7th note is dissonant. It's out of tune with the rest of them. And it's where we get like the tritones. Tritone is going to have that 7th note in it. So the 7th note in that series, let's say the open one, so it starts at C, middle C, and it goes up through the harmonic series. These are the exact notes that Brian just played. A trumpet can't do equal temperament when you go through the series. It actually plays harmonics, and you actually overblow. So you actually blow harder into the trumpet, and that's how you go from one harmonic to the next, making like a raspberry into the mouthpiece. But trumpets also have equal temperament in the way they're tuned with the buttons you press, so the valves. So if you press the second valve, you'll go down half a step. If you press the first valve, you go down a full step, down to B flat. So then, as you can see, depending on how many valves, and let's say we go down one down the bottom here. So if you press all 3 at the same time, you'll go down 3 whole steps. And this is how trumpets are able to make any note that a piano can make. But trumpeters are told, don't do the 7th overtone. So they're in parentheses saying that note exists, but don't play it because it'll be out of tune with everyone else in the orchestra or the band. So if you need to get to that 7th note, you press down on one of the keys and get there a different way.
Go ahead, Ray.
Very quickly, two things. The valves on a trumpet lengthen and shorten the trumpet. Okay, they lengthen it in all cases. All right, and let me just point out to everyone, here is an app called Just Intonation. Okay, and if you go on the App Store, it's Just Intonation is the name of the app. You can go in there and play with this. And let me turn on my mic so I can use both hands. And let me just very briefly give you an example. I'm going to play a little organ piece here on my iPhone. And this is in equal temperament. All right, now I am going to shift it to just intonation.
It's hard. That doesn't translate too well over the mic.
Fair enough.
Yep.
But you
Yep.
can download. I can't remember. I don't think it
Yep.
costs much, or maybe free. At any rate, you can play. There's a whole bunch of things you can do here to play and listen,
Right.
and get a hands-on with
Right.
just intonation versus even temperament. Where I got involved in this stuff was I served on the BC Science Council that gives grants for research and development, and a company here in Vancouver called Justonic actually wrote a piece of software that would make micro-tunable synthesizers play in just tuning automatically from a keyboard or a fretted instrument. I've talked long enough. I'll bow out for now.
Go ahead, Brian. And we're going to jump to the questions here in a couple minutes.
I was going to attempt to play. My chops aren't what they used to be when I used to play this thing for a living, but I'm going to play the harmonic series on a horn, and you'll notice that Jeff's got an image up there of a string and where the nodes are. A column of air does the same thing. So I'm going to, with not very good French horn chops nowadays, play the harmonic series. But what I'm going to do is just blow and with my lip move from note to note. Rather, no left hand, and won't be pressing any keys. Pardon me while I warm up, and I hope this isn't too loud.
Okay, there we go. That's not the fundamental. That's one octave up. I can't reach the fundamental at the moment. There's that flat, B flat. Should have warmed up. But you kind of, I was hitting all those notes without pressing a single key on the horn.
Go ahead, Greg.
I think we've all experienced the situation of electric guitar players, and especially on Stratocasters for some reason, constantly tuning and retuning and checking their tuning on the thing, and they get it all exactly in tune, and they strum a chord and it doesn't sound right. So they start readjusting. They start readjusting until it sounds right, and then it's not in the pitch where equal temper wants it to be. It's in the pitch that the guitar wants it to be because of the harmonic relationships.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's jump into the questions.
First one's coming in here from Jeff Francis in Columbia, South Carolina. I'd love for the musicians on the panel to comment on the specific tuning idiosyncrasies of various instruments.
We started to touch on this, of these instruments all having their own resonant key that they want to be in. Go ahead, Carl, and then Jeff.
Yeah, so as Greg said before, like something that's fretted, so a piano has to be equal temperament because I have to tune the strings in the piano. Whereas the horn we just heard Brian play, he's playing a harmonic series without pressing any keys, and he's getting just temperament in that whole series. If he presses a key, depending on the manufacturer of that horn, it'll change the fundamental to an equal temperament to the piano so he can play with the piano, but then all the series in when he presses that one key will be, again, just temperament. So he's going to avoid the seventh harmonic, of course. So he says that's the one thing all horn and trumpet players will know. The other thing, tuned percussion, like marimbas, xylophones, they have to be equal temperament. You can actually swap them out. So you can actually have these tuned percussion to be just temperament in a certain key. So if that percussion is going to play one thing, it can be in just temperament. I have many synthesizers. Synthesizers can be in any temperament you want. You can be outside Western temperament, actually. You can be kind of in some crazy territory, as we've heard Brian play on his synthesizer. There are some other, like ocarinas. So ocarinas they play like two notes in themselves. They are just temperament. But they kind of get interesting when you have these kind of instruments that can play two notes, like bagpipes, which is technically a reed instrument. Bagpipes are also a just temperament that doesn't sound like it's a just temperament. But yeah, so pianos, tuned instruments, fretted instruments. Guitars can get away from being equal temperament by using a slide. So slide guitars can be just temperament. So there are a few ways to make an instrument both.
Go ahead, Jeff, and then Brian.
For grand piano, there's actually another thing that comes into play, which is the tension of the string actually throws off the harmonic sequence. So the first or the second harmonic is not a precise doubling. It's actually slightly sharp. So pianos are done in what's called stretch tuning, where actually as you go higher on the piano, the pitch gets sharper, and as you go lower on the piano, the pitch gets lower. So it's centered around equal, but actually stretches away. And so that's primarily for solo grand piano. But if you end up playing an ensemble with this, I'm a bass player, so I found this out the hard way one time where I went to go tune my low E string. So I pushed the low E string on the piano, which is actually flatter than E should be because the piano was stretched. And so I tuned my bass and I ended up being flat as soon as we started playing as an ensemble. I needed to tune to the center region of the piano, which is tuned to, typical A440, 440 hertz, which is a common tuning note.
Brian?
So a trombone, because a trombone has a slide instead of valves, a trombone player can sort of micro adjust, and depending if they're playing in, say, a brass ensemble where there are no fretted or piano, keyed instruments, they will be adjusting and going for that sort of barbershop quartet sound that Ray was referring to. The French horn, you can do the same thing, and I've taken the bell off of my horn, and my horn has a screw-on bell. You've probably seen French horn players have their hand inside the bell. And as a French horn player, what I'm doing, I'm going to try and
frame this up so you can all see it. I'll have my hand inside the bell, so now I'm up inside the tube of the horn. And as I am playing, when I get to that B flat that's not quite in tune, I will actually, I'll do this with my hand. I'll tilt it in, and I'm essentially making that tube a little shorter, the horn a little shorter, and therefore a little sharper, and bringing it in tune. So depending on where and what I'm playing, this is moving all the time to bring it into tune.
It's crazy. It's amazing. You know, I think that it's always, you know, they're like, what's interesting is that all musicians, or not all, but all accomplished musicians will all understand all these things. And it's just like this magical little land of how all these things interrelate to each other. And it's always amazing to watch musicians because they'll, oh, that's and they'll, you know, for me, it's still kind of a magic. You know, I'm this is slowly making the magic science, but it's still magic to me that, you know, of understanding that it seems like, and for me, it's all anyone who records, you know, there's definitely artists that I've worked with that just play and they don't know anything about what they're, you know, playing other than it sounds good, which is fine. You know, like there are definitely artists that can just do that thing. But the artists that really are recording is usually when, if they've been in a studio and they have to understand how, or they play with other artists, especially ones that aren't from their own culture, they get real mathematical about it real quick, you know, about how this is all gonna, I deal with that with, we do work with Nimbira artists, you know, because I think that they're in, I want to say G sharp. It's G, I think. I don't know it well enough, so it doesn't stick in my head. But converting that, you know, they have to figure out how they're going to convert that and how they're going to retune the Nimbira so they can play with Western notes and so on and so forth. And it's a really fascinating thing to kind of watch. And then of course, some will take, don't ever do that. Like you can't do that with the Nimbira. Yeah. Anyway, go ahead, Ray, and then Courtney, and then back to Brian.
Real quickly, the top trumpet players, they have a micro tuning slide that they use their little finger with. If you watch Doc Severinsen play, you'll see him do this. The other thing I wanted to mention is Justonic wrote this wonderful software. And when I suggested they get the grant, and they did, by the way, and they wrote the software and it worked, and they gave me a copy, and it was great fun to play with. Anyway, I thought every music school in the world would buy a copy of that. It didn't happen. Justonic went out of business.
Right.
It's sad. But if you go on and Google just intonation or just tuning, you'll find all kinds of articles, and there are groups that play in it.
Yep. Go ahead, Courtney, and then Greg.
Is this why Eastern musical instruments like the Kyoto or the sitar, are they playing in a completely different tempered scale?
Yeah, they have more than 12 notes in the scale.
Yeah. Go ahead, Greg, and then Brian, and then Carl.
Okay, and plus building on something else that Ray touched on, there's a whole bunch of contemporary composers that work in microtonal scales, and in fact they can have I think the highest I've read, one guy had 157 intervals in an octave. Okay, and the way he builds the pieces is he composes in just tuning, but each interval that he moves to or that he combines has that no beat mathematical pure harmonic relationship to each other. So in that case, it doesn't matter how many notes you have per octave. I mean, we have in equal tempered, we have 12, right? So he's got 157. Right. So we're dealing way past quarter tones. Yeah. So but the way they construct it, it's all still harmonically pleasing, in a way, because they resonate together. These tones resonate together in that pure vibration.
Go ahead, Brian, and then Carl.
So a couple quick things. Todd Reynolds, our resident violinist, was bummed he couldn't be here today, but there's another instrument that he's micro-tuning all the time as he's moving around, because it's not a fretted instrument. And so that was one thing. Another thing on the French horn, as an example, so we've got the valves you can see here. Before horns had valves, there'd be a piece of music written and it would say horn in F
for example, or maybe B flat. So be horn and B flat. And then maybe partway through the piece, or maybe in a different movement, it would say horn and E flat. And what would have to happen is the horn player would probably take out this slide and put in a different one that had a big loop in it, and that would change the fundamental of the horn from maybe a B flat to an E flat. Now, with valves, I can basically do the very same thing just by pressing down a valve. And then the final piece, and I don't know, Jeff, if you have the harmonic series handy again, one of the things that makes playing the horn so difficult is that you saw on the harmonic series, as you get further and further up and you get up into those above 10, 11, 12, they're all clustered together. Music for horn is often written demanding the horn player to play those notes. And so it's really hard to hit the target because they're so close together. If you're playing the ones lower down, it's much easier, but often the horn is asked to do that, and that's what makes it a pretty difficult instrument.
And well, that's what sets the horn player apart. Like a good horn player apart is accuracy, right? I mean, being able to hit those accurately.
And that would not be me anymore.
It was never me. I played the trumpet for a couple years, and as a child, it was never me either. That's why I don't play anymore.
I don't know how the lengths compare from, say, a trombone to a horn. I would guess that the total length of tubing in both are going to be similar. Right. But, you know, a trombone is generally asked to play much lower than a horn is. So that's the difference there.
Yeah, go ahead, Carl.
So I just wanted to give a good example of micro tuning that Greg was talking about before. In an example that we may have all have seen or technically heard. So in Netflix's show Stranger Things in the first season, when the big baddie, the Demogorgon, shows up, you'll hear this out of tune series of notes, which is actually tuned up on a synthesizer. And they're actually micro tuning. So they're not on any scale that we know of. And it's because the creators of the music just went to 8 random notes, but they had to actually sticky tape that off because they would never get those notes back again. So that particular module in their synthesizer, they had to actually leave it alone for the whole season. So when the baddie showed up and we hear these out of tune notes, they are exactly the same the whole time. And then in the second season, they got rid of it because they had to use a synthesizer for something else. But that's one example of off tuning or micro tuning that most people on the panel may have heard from the first season of Stranger Things.
Yeah, go ahead, Greg.
I was gonna. You were talking earlier about a bunch of musicians discussing the microtonalities of things and the fineries. You're talking about your average remotes band meeting,
right? Yeah. Well, and it's also where what I've noticed is, you know, working a couple times when I've worked in an audio in a recording studio, is the difference between a lot of times the band and the session players. Is the band is kind of like, I came in and played the song, and the session players will break down and they can tell you exactly, you know, what makes reggae and what makes rock and what makes jazz, you know, and it's the, you know, between the tempos and the thing, and they understand it. And it's just a matter of why I was interested in this, and I'm just barely keeping up, you know, like, you know, in what we're doing. I think a lot of us are just trying to kind of, it's making more sense, but it is, you know, understanding this with precision is in everything that we do. What we're trying to do in office hours is, whether it's video or audio, is really understanding why it works. You know, as my kids, we've been watching a lot of Heroes. And this is not necessarily a light version of it, but what my kids call going Siler on it. so anyway, is understanding how it works. Go ahead, Jeff, and then Brian.
So if you're interested in alternate microtonality tuning systems, I'm going to put a couple of links in Mukana. Dennis Aman is a composer who wrote a series of 24 preludes and fugues, and each one is set to a different breakdown of an octave, from 1 note per octave to 2 notes per octave, 3 notes per octave, 4 notes per, all the way to 24 notes per octave. So they had to construct instruments that could play these pieces. So the one YouTube link I'm going to put is 4 notes to the octave, and it involves, it's played on a microtonal quarter tone guitar. So it's a guitar with 24 frets where there should be 12. And also a thing called a jellophone, which is kind of looks like the old CNC. No, not CNC. The Simon Says, with hunks of jello as the triggers for the 4 notes per octave. And awesome. Then if you look in Logic actually has a project tuning setup And there is an entire list of tuning systems in there that you can choose to have it automatically retune your synthesizers. Some of those are based on a particular key. Some of them are equal. Some of them are going to analyze the harmony and try to make the best integer relationships, that barbershop quartet sound that Ray was talking about. Is going to try and do that based on the particular notes that are being played at that particular time. So that's an interesting technique. And Ray, that's probably why that company didn't succeed, is Apple Sherlocked it.
Brian.
Alex, you mentioned jazz. Things like jazz we would not have, I don't think, without equal temperament, especially if you're going to be using guitars and pianos, because the altered chords that are used in jazz, in a lot of jazz chords, would not sound right if we would be cringing to hear them otherwise.
Let's go to the next question.
Next question is coming in from JJ McKenna in Santa Venetia, California. In examining the resonant frequencies of the human body, how much of an influence has that had on individuated tuning preferences? And he has a note here that says human standing body resonance is between 5 and 16 hertz, independent of mass per numerous studies.
Yeah, go ahead, Tyler.
It makes a huge deal. Like recently, within the last, I think, week and a half, Dave Ratt has a YouTube video on how polarity with a mic with in-ears can affect the way a singer sings. So if that's the case, then the way you hear a musician, your body resonance would totally make a difference.
Interesting. Next question.
Next one's coming in from Ray Maxwell. I would love to do a short introduction to just tuning. And he's waving us off because he's already done
I already
that.
did it.
Yeah, it's good.
All right.
I did what I wanted to do.
Excellent. Perfect. Next question.
Rock and roll. On to the next one. Dave Kaufman, Vancouver, BC. Does it ever sound okay to mix equal and just tempered instruments together, say if they are playing in the natural key?
Go ahead, Carl.
Yeah, so jazz is a good example. So trumpet and piano. So trumpet has the ability to do both, but it's series. When it's doing a run, when a trumpet does a run, essentially, it's going to do a run in the harmonic series, avoiding the seventh maybe, or detuning as you put the hand in the horn, or trombone, of course, and piano, of course. Generally, jazz pianos are going to be equal temperament the whole way up and down, not stretched.
Go ahead, Greg.
The places where you're going to run into trouble on this is primarily with the thirds and that flat 7 above. So, you know, the fundamentals and the octave harmonics are gonna work, you know, really well. The fifths are gonna work pretty well. The fourths are gonna work pretty well. It's those thirds where you're gonna get some beating because they're not, you know, they're not together, and somebody's gonna have to move one way or the other.
Go ahead, Brian.
Well, and even something like, I think Victor would say on saxophone, and anybody playing a wind instrument can do some level of adjustment, maybe not to the degree that I can with a hand and a horn, but you could you could use your lip and your embouchure to move a note just enough so it's going to work in that space.
Next question.
Next one's from Scott Mueller in Clinton Corners, New York. Can you talk about the difference between tuning a guitar with a tuner for each string and tuning the next string to the 5th or 4th fret of the previous string? And he's got a note here that says, what's better for a person plagued with the affliction of hearing dissonances in microtunings?
Go ahead, Carl, and then Greg, and then Jeff.
So if you take your guitar to a guitar technician and they set up your guitar properly, at the bridge of some guitars, let's say a Stratocaster, it actually has like little micro adjustments. So you can actually adjust how long the string is. So you'll have the string's harmonic note and the string's actual note when played. And when those two are actually together, and they use special kind of tuners for this, they can actually see right down to micro tuning when they do this. So you want each string's going to be a little bit different length because each string's a different note except for the E's, I guess. And so essentially what they're doing is they're tuning the harmonic of the string, which is the fundamental. We saw the graph before of the string vibrating, and a note on that string to fit within that fundamentals series. And you do that for each of the strings, and then you go back and do it again, and you do it again, and then you get closer. But a technician would probably do it 3 times to get them exactly right.
Greg, and then Jeff.
Yeah, that is exactly the concept. So that to check your intonation, what you do is you play that first that first harmonic on the 12th string, and then you fret the 12th string, the 12th fret, and play that, and they should match exactly. So then you can go about doing your other one, tuning fourth to fifth. But the honest way of tuning your guitar is with harmonics. Going the fifth fret on the low string to the seventh fret on the next string, and those should match without beating.
Go ahead, Jeff.
So what Greg was saying, the fifth fret is going to split the string into 4 parts, so it's 2 octaves up, and then the seventh fret will split the next string into 3 parts, so it's a fifth up, and those will be the same note, and so you tune those to be the same, and that's about the closest. Choosing the fretting of the 5th or 4th fret is a bad idea, because also you're adding the tension of pressing down on the string, so that can actually throw off the intonation. So doing it with harmonics doesn't add any additional tension of you pressing on the string.
Next question.
Next one's from Marty Attias in Silver Spring, Maryland. A single piano key hammers 3 strings. How are they tuned?
Go ahead, Carl.
So they're actually a little bit detuned, so they're not all tuned to the same frequency. And this has to do with the trade-off of equal versus pure temperament. So essentially when you're playing a different key, it actually gives resonance. There's a beating, the resonance actually changes as the sound, as the strings slowly stop to vibrate, they actually change their harmonics based on this. And it also is a volume thing. So if they're all in the same volume, you can have a problem of them canceling each other out. So the strings can actually get into a phase cancellation. If they're slightly different, they won't cancel each other out, and actually increases. It's mainly to do with volume, they found. With the lower strings, you only have 2 strings, sometimes 1 string in the deep bass, of course. But it has to do with volume, because the higher strings have a harder time getting volume out of the piano, where the lower strings much easier to get the volume out. So they detune them a little bit so you don't get phase cancellation between the strings, which will lower your volume.
Next question.
James Babbitt in San Diego. How does a composer choose the key for their composition? What changes when playing in different keys?
Go ahead, Carl.
So the lead instrument. So for instance, John Williams uses a lot of brass in Star Wars. So he will pick a key that suits the brass players, because the brass is going to play some pretty big punchy chords in some of the Star Wars music. If it's a string piece, he may go a different direction, pick a different key for the string pieces.
And I guess would it also be the feel of what you want? I mean, whether it's have you guys ever seen the Smells Like Teen Spirit in a major key? So I'll just play it just for a second to see. So if you take, we all know Smells Like Teen Spirit, but if we go into let's see here. Oops, I'm gonna have to stop this for a second. Let's share it with audio. And I hit the wrong thing. Hold on. This was going to go so well. Load up on guns, bring your friends, fun to lose, to pretend. And what's funny is it goes from grunge to pop really fast. It's on YouTube. You can find it there. But it's what I was amazed at. As it says, I retuned this and it now sounds like Weezer. So it's a fascinating thing of how the entire feel of a song, changes the whole flavor of how it comes across. Next question.
Next one's from TJ Asher and says, this got me thinking about Close Encounters, where musical notes play a key part in the film. Is there anything special about those 5 notes?
Go ahead, Carl.
So they're part of the harmonic series. So that's a very classic one. It actually uses a 2500 analog synthesizer. So they're actually, technically they would be in pure, because they're a harmonic series. It's one of the first things you learn to play in the harmonic series. When you're taught the harmonic series, you go, oh, I can play classic clowns now. It's right there.
Go ahead, Jeff. Did you have something, Jeff?
They're special because they were given John Williams' blessing.
There we go.
He sprinkled his magic dust on them.
Next question.
Art by Junior in Cupertino. I was wondering what is going on with Carl's audio. It makes him sound like he's at 2x all the time. I think that's just Carl, isn't it?
It's just me.
Next question.
Next one's from Marty, and he asks, how do you harmonically tune the second string on a guitar?
Yeah, go ahead, Carl.
So I'll go, yeah, so we explained a little bit. So let's say you're taking the first string, which is a high E, that's the first string on a guitar. You're going to get the harmonic of the 12th fret and the 12th fret pressed to be the same note. So you're going to tune those two first. Once you've got those two tuned, then you can do the 5th fret and 7th fret harmonic, and therefore your B string, your second string on the guitar, will be harmonically in act. But you have to do the first step first. You have to get that first step where the 12th fret and the harmonic of the 12th fret on the first string is the same note. From there, you can tune all the rest of the notes by the harmonics from the 5th to the 7th, or the 4th to 5th in the case of the second and third string.
Next question.
Andrew Lipnick in San Francisco. It seems that a guitar would need to have its intonation readjusted to play in just tuning. Is that correct? And if so, how will that affect string length?
Go ahead, Greg.
I think Carl is gonna address this too, but no, the point is that it's you're adjusting the string length to match the natural harmonic of that string. You know, so it's you're not bringing it into equal temper. In fact, you're bringing it into just tuning.
Go ahead, Carl.
So lap steel guitars, which are guitars that are laid on your lap and you play with a slide, and slide guitars, which are found in more rock and pop. So slide guitars are a way, which is heard in the song, original version of Layla by Eric Clapton. He has pianos and he has slide guitar in the outro. So you actually have a mixture of just and equal temperament in that song.
All out of questions.
We're all out of questions, and I think a lot of us are still just keeping up. But for some reason, I'm fascinated by this whole process. And so, again, I'm not very technical when it comes to music, and so so it's starting to, like, I think that was the thing that I wanted to do when it was brought up in the second hour is just to start having people just dive into the deep end and let's just talk about it, get people thinking about it, and having people see the relationship between all of these notes, because it is all math. You know, it is, and the more the more I can relate it to math, the more it makes sense. I think before it was just like a bunch of hocus pocus that the band does when they get ready, and I don't understand any of it. And now it's starting to make sense around wavelengths and around octaves and around, math scales. And so it's not the last conversation we're going to have about this, because I think that it's a fascinating thing for us to really understand. Go ahead, Greg.
There's a guy named Karl-Heinz Stockhausen, who is he's a fairly famous composer, but he is in fact not really a musician. He's a mathematician, and he constructs algorithms, and all of his pieces are pure math.
Are they any good?
It depends who you talk to.
No, they're not. They're terrible.
Okay. All right, Jason. No, let me say that I think they're difficult to listen to. I wouldn't play a whole side of it.
It's great music, but very difficult to listen to.
It is. It's very difficult.
It's very accurate. Go ahead. Go ahead, Jeff.
So all this stuff we've been talking about with the harmonic series and columns of air in horns and trumpets, that directly goes into studio and room acoustics, because between the walls of your room, you have a column of air, and that sets up standing waves and the harmonics of those standing waves. So that's how we get these resonant frequencies in rooms. It's the same principles.
Go ahead, Brian.
And to the math, and then if you're composing music, the organization of stacking the right notes to get the right kind of chord together. I was a music theory major and a computer science minor, and they hired me as a programmer. The guy in charge of the IT department saw me in the lab doing homework, and he went, "You're a musician, aren't you? I want to hire you because musicians make good programmers." So it all kind of ties together, the logical way of thinking, the way of stacking things up, and the math and so on.
Right. Good, Marty.
We can, and to that point about room acoustics, there are times when you could be tuning up a sound system, trying to eliminate room modes like feedback frequencies, and you'll find the the actual frequency that you're hearing and try to duck that down in an equalizer, and it doesn't do anything. And that's because what you're actually hearing is a harmonic of the actual frequency that's being regenerated in the sound system.
Yeah, go ahead, Carl.
So this goes back to one of the questions that was asked earlier. So why do composers choose which key? And from key, you've got major and minor, but you've also got the key of whereabouts. What's the fundamental key? So is it being played in C or D flat? This has a lot to do with probably 100, 150 years ago, composers knew where they would premiere that song, that particular symphony, that piece, and they knew the fundamentals that would resonate in that room. So instead of killing down the fundamentals of that room, the standing waves, they would use them to amplify fundamentals and the fifth. So they'd actually play in that room and say, okay, this note is louder in this room and this note is louder in this room. I'm going to make my symphony with fundamentals in those notes. So this room will really resonate when the horns play that note.
Yeah, go ahead, Ray.
Yeah, the other thing about transposing and playing in different keys is it also helps a lot if you suit the vocal range of a soloist. You transpose it to a key where the range of those 8 notes in a particular key are in the range of the voice of the singer.
Yeah, and one of the things I thought was interesting is I'm going to try to get them to come on, I think, is the folks have started figuring out that a lot of the chants, that we hear are all based on the cathedral that they were created in. And and none of them, a lot of them didn't sound as good until you're in that cathedral. And then I was listening to there was I don't know whether it was NPR. It was like a whole, I think it was much longer than
Took me an hour to find that. I hope you didn't lose that again.
I did. I don't know where it is, but it is it's fascinating that they were able to recreate it digitally with impulses, and the monks that were creating it were in that cathedral, and so they only worried about how it sounded there, and it didn't have to sound good everywhere. It wasn't going to be recorded. Go ahead, Ray.
I got to tell one quick story. There was a group, I can't remember their names, here in the US who were trying to build a beautiful synthesizer that would emulate the great organs of Europe. Okay. And so they worked on this. They went around all over Europe and sampled all of these organs very carefully. And then they went off and they worked and they figured out how to shift the frequencies and everything. And they went back to Europe to one of these families that had been making pipe organs for over, 400 years or something. And they played it for him. And they said, well, what do you think? What do you think? Did we capture it? Do we capture it? And he said, well, I hate to tell you this, but, and a guy says, well, let me point out something. Do you notice we got the sound of the inrush of the air? And then there's that little valve that goes clunk and closes, and we captured that. And, we really emulated the pipe organ. And the guy said, yeah, our family's been trying to get rid of that clunk for 400 years.
Go ahead, Jeff.
So all of our talk of harmonic series and overtones, that all comes from Fourier. And that's where we get the Fourier transform and the discrete Fourier transform and then the fast Fourier transform. So all of this goes directly into digital signal processing and converting from our time domain to frequency domain and all those crazy things we can do once we get there.
That's fascinating. Anyway, now we have to figure out how to get funding from Netflix to just do a whole series on the math or the science of music. That's what we have to figure out next. All right. We're going to now jump into the post show. Thanks to our really fascinating. I know that it was hard for a lot of people to. I knew this one would be a hard one for everyone to get their head around, but we have to have some of these every. Like I don't want to do this every day, but some like really deep. And we have such scholars when it comes to music here that it's great to dive deep into the audio side of things. And so anyway, I just want to thank all of our panelists, our scholars here. Not even panelists, but scholars that are helping us really understand this. It's really fun. So I plan to keep on making audio. I mean, we'll have fun ones too, but dive deep so we become experts as a group, because it's the most important part of what we do. Like, I'll just keep on saying it. Sound and audio is the most important It's the first sense that we really pay attention to before before we're even interacting with the world directly. So it's a super important function for us to understand. So anyway, and then thanks to our producers who asked a lot of great questions, and we'll see you in the post show.